The Ironman World Champs is almost here, but for the first time in its history, it's not in Hawaii. So in today's special Ironman World Championship preview, I'm going to be taking a look at the St. George course, but also comparing it to the Kona course to see what makes this World Championship race so interesting. And we'll also, of course, be taking a look at some of those pro athletes contending for the Ironman World Championship title, and also which athletes may gain an advantage from it not being in Kona. So much to unpack, so let's jump on into this Ironman World Championship preview. So Kona is iconic and famous, or infamous, and most of the triathlon world can identify many of the parts of the course which are steeped in history and have played host to so many great battles over the years. Which is why so many people were disappointed, horrified even, when they heard that Kona 2021 won't be in Kona, or in 2021. But Ironman obviously were faced with a tough decision. The World Champs couldn't happen in Hawaii in October due to the pandemic. And despite announcing that it would, the World Champs also couldn't happen in Kona in February. Officially due to the pandemic, but most likely actually due to logistics. February, unlike October, is high tourism season, so hosting 3,000 athletes and their entourages would be all but impossible in the tiny town of Kona in February. Also the main reason it was moved from February to October back in 1982. So Ironman could either not crown any 2021 Ironman World Champions or move it elsewhere. Well, we got to say, we're pretty glad they chose the latter. And so St. George is hosting the 2021 Ironman World Championships in May 2022. This means that a lot of what we would consider predictable for an Ironman World Championships is anything but. We actually have no idea what to expect, but we're going to take some calculated guesses today, and whether we're right or wrong on them, one thing is pretty much guaranteed: it's going to be exciting. So let's start by taking a look at the course, and it is of course an Ironman distance, so the same 3.8 kilometre swim, 180 kilometre bike and 42.2 kilometre run as Kona. And like Kona, it promises to be hot, but that is pretty much where the similarities end. The swim is not in the ocean, the bike is not an out and back on a windswept highway, and the run is also not out and back on a scorching highway, with no energy lab in sight. I don't think anyway. So let's take a look at the course. We'll start where the competitors will, with the swim. Now then, Kona swim is in the ocean, obviously, salty and around 26 degrees Celsius. Sometimes it's a bit choppy, often even with some swells, and with literally just 2 right turns. Whereas St. George is going to be very different. The water will not nearly be as warm, probably actually even wetsuit legal for the age groupers, maybe even for the pros, because the average water temperature in May is around 63 degrees Fahrenheit or 17 Celsius. But it could get as low as 56 Fahrenheit or 13 Celsius, or as high as 71.6 Fahrenheit. But seeing as the race is in early May, chances are it will be on the lower side of this range, which means wetsuits, quite likely. And it's in a reservoir, so there will be little more than a ripple on it. In fact, normally it is mirror-like in the early mornings. The route's not complicated either. It's half a mile, then a right, 2 right turns at halfway, and then a left turn with half a mile to go. But this is also fresh water and no chop. So it is possible the best swimmers could more easily break away than they might do in Kona. We could see the pro race getting pretty interesting far earlier than we normally do in Kona. Well, we hope so anyway. Okay, so out of the swim, and T1 is pretty much as straightforward as a T1 can get. Run to the far north end of transition, change and exit at the south end. Nothing really to talk about there, and nothing really that sets it apart from Kona. But once on the bike route itself, this is where St. George very much isn't Kona. In Kona, after a very short out and back on Kwakini, the route is then a very long out and back to Harvey. The St. George course is a loop, actually 2 loops, but the second is much smaller. The start is pretty straightforward, a 25 kilometre out and back section with hardly a turn on it. We'll let I guess everyone's settled into their biking, and a U-turn after 15 kilometers means everyone will know exactly where everyone else is early on into the bike. Thereafter, it is a long, slightly bumpy loop back around the reservoir before passing the town of St George itself via the Red Hills Parkway. After this, at around 50 miles or 80 kilometers, the athletes start the first of two loops, a bigger one of about 43 miles and then a smaller one of about 16 miles. Each of these loops to the north involve substantial climbing for the first half and a fast descent in the second half. From about 60 miles to 80 miles, the road hits gunlock drive, climbing steadily about 1,700 feet or 500 meters in 20 miles. This isn't a steep gradient at all, although some short sections near the top touch 7%, but the climb only actually averages around 1.5% gradient. But it's 20 miles long, and if they've burnt their matches in the first half, this is where we're going to see some athletes suffering, and I do predict a few implosions in this section. It's then a long descent back towards town, about 20 kilometers at an average gradient of -3% on straight roads, which means it's going to be fast. But just as the athletes think they can see town and T2, they're sent right for another 16-mile loop. And this loop includes the famous Snow Canyon. And I'm sure the competitors won't, but as a spectator, certainly appreciate Ironman changing the previous Ironman St George route to include this climb. At 8 kilometers long and an average gradient of 3.5%, it's not a mountain, but it gets steeper as you go, with a 500-meter section near the top at 12%. And coming 100 miles into an Ironman, it's going to hurt. So once to the top of this, it is all downhill for 10 miles to T2, but not steep enough to not pedal. So if you've got anything left in the tank, you'll want to pedal. So then, how different is this to Kona? Well, in short, very. Kona is rolling hills and everyone talks about the climb to Harvey. And it feels like a climb, especially if it's windy. But that climb is only about 10 kilometers at an average grade of 1.5%. And it comes halfway through the bike. Almost all the climbing in St George happens in the second half, and there is a lot more of it than in Kona. The conditions will also be very different too. It may be hot, a daytime high of about 30 degrees Celsius is normal in May, but it won't be Kona hot. There'll be far less humidity. The prevailing winds are from the south, which will help up both climbs if they materialize, but climbing with a tailwind will obviously also add to the heat loads. So are we going to go out on a limb with predictions? Well, I think we should, right? I predict some heroes early on the bike, but the main players coming together into a lead pack and a chasing pack by halfway. And then I reckon some fireworks in the second half with multiple early players being shelled on that first climb and some stronger guys bridging the gap between the packs up this climb. And then both packs being blown to bits on the second climb up Snow Canyon. So I reckon we'll have groups of 2s and 3s entering T2. But this is Ironman, and so, as always, it's going to come down to the run. Now, the run is fairly nondescript, really, but it's obviously going to be very challenging. With almost no flat on the entire route, the mental strength to adjust from feeling good on a slight downhill to feeling lousy on a slight uphill multiple times may be the deciding factor. So we've got 2 out and back loops with the starting point and turning point of each loop about 120 meters or 400 feet lower than the highest point of the route. The athletes will essentially run 5 kilometers slight uphill, 5 kilometers slight downhill, turn around, and then 5 kilometers slight uphill, and then 5 kilometers slight downhill, and repeat that all again. So the strength for the uphill, efficient form for the downhill, and almost no flat on the entire lap. This route is going to challenge everyone. And add to that, we have the heat of the midday desert sun to the mix. It is most likely going to be a race of attrition. Whoever slows down the least will win. So then, who do we think will take the win? Well, like everything else about this World Champs, the run-up to it has been very unusual. Normally, we would have had an entire season of races to judge athletes' form off and get a measure of their readiness for Kona. But with this race more or less happening on the weekend that most pros might usually be starting their season, we have a lot less to go on. There has been a total of 1 pro Ironman so far this year, Ironman South Africa, and any pro taking St George seriously probably didn't want to travel that far 5 weeks out, except Joe Skipper, of course. And then there have been a few 70.3s like Dubai and Oceanside where we have seen some impressive form on display. But it's very likely that someone out there is in sublime form, but hasn't actually had a race opportunity to display it yet this early in the season. And so we don't even know they're about to maybe set the world alight. So with that disclaimer out of the way, let's look at who we think might take the win. Starting with the ladies. So first, a quick nod to obviously who won't be there, as you've probably heard. 3-time Kona runner-up and reigning 70.3 world champion Lucy Charles-Barclay has unfortunately got a stress fracture in her hip and is out of action. Also, 2019 Kona podium finisher Sarah Crowley has opted to stay in Australia and race Ironman Australia a week before St George and then focus on Kona in October. Olympic gold medalist Flora Duffy also declined her invitation, and Michelle Vesterby and Kimberly Morrison both qualified, are expecting babies, so won't be racing. So obviously congrats to them. So then, to the favourites, we've got defending Kona champion in 2019, Annie Haug, who recently placed second in, I guess, a less favoured distance in 70.3 Lanzarote. And this course may really suit her small stature and ever-reliable run speed. Also, we have 4th place finisher at Kona in 2019 and apparently in sublime form, having won 70.3 Dubai in a world's fastest time, beating Daniela Ryf in the process. Here's Laura Philipp, and she has got to be a favourite, if not the favourite for St George. And before you say 70.3 is an Ironman, her results since her 4th in Kona in 2019 make for some impressive reading. She won Ironman Finland and Ironman Austria in 2021 with runs of 2 hours 52 and 2:44 and is currently PTO world number 1. Speaking of Daniela Ryf, she is a bit of an unknown heading into St George. No one obviously would be foolish enough to write off a 4-time Ironman and 5-time 70.3 world champion, but her form has been questionable of late. After winning 70.3 Worlds in September 2019, she finished an unlucky 13th at Kona, didn't race in 2020 at all, 11th at the 2021 70.3 World Champs, and recently was beaten obviously by Laura Philipp in Dubai, and then finished a distant 10th at Oceanside. But like I say, I certainly wouldn't write her off. We also have some other notable names. Heather Jackson, who was 5th at Kona in 2019, has won Ironman Florida. Kat Matthews, currently PTO world number 6 and won 70.3 Lanzarote recently. Fenella Langridge, who also recently won Challenge Salou. We also have the likes of Ruth Assel, who has won Ironman Mallorca and Ironman South Africa. We've also got Sky Munch, Lisa Norden. Well, who have I missed? So drop your dark horses in the comments below. But now, let's take a look at the men. Well, again, we are obviously just guessing a bit here. We just clearly don't know what kind of form these guys are in, as we have very little information to go on. Again, let's note who won't be there this year. So unfortunately, 2-time Kona champion and PTO world number 6, Patrick Langer, is unfortunately out. He had a crash on his bike and is obviously still recovering from that. Tim O'Donnell, runner-up at the last Ironman World Champs, is also unfortunately not racing. So, who are our favourites? Well, of course, we can't forget Jan Frodeno, can we? Defending and 3-time Ironman World Champion has to be considered a favourite, if not the favourite. But we haven't seen him race in a while. In fact, the last time he raced was actually at the Collins Cup in August. And if you follow his Instagram, he's done a lot of skiing lately. But he is arguably the GOAT and still the top of most people's favourite list. We then, however, do have the Norwegians who might mix things up. Gustav Iden is PTO world number 1, but the reigning 70.3 world champion has only done 1 Ironman, although very fast. 7 hours 42 and with a 2:34 marathon in Ironman Florida. Similarly, his countryman and Olympic gold medalist Christian Blumenfeld has only done 1 Ironman too, but it is the world best time technically, 7 hours 21 in Cozumel in November. So are the Norwegians that good? Or will their lack of experience over the distance and lack of any experience at Ironman World Champs let them down? We also, of course, have world number 3, Lionel Sanders, who has won Ironman St George before, albeit on a different course. He also won an epic showdown with Sam Long here in the 70.3. But a weaker swim in the unforgiving fresh water may leave him playing catch-up for much of this race. In a similar boat, or will be wishing for a boat maybe, PTO number 5, Sam Long. He is on fine form though, sorry Sam, having won Clash Miami and Challenge Puerto Varas, both halves though, and had success in St George with his 2nd in 70.3 Worlds last year. But he too will be chasing from early on. These guys moving through the field will definitely affect the race, but how much will it affect their own run legs? It says a lot about how stacked this field is that I've got this far and haven't even yet mentioned the Olympic gold medalist Alistair Brownlee. He has struggled with injury and didn't race at all for nearly 18 months, but he's back with a fourth at Oceanside, 70.3 in April. He wasn't happy, obviously, with that fourth there, but was leading within a few kilometres to go and ran a 1:11. He doesn't have a lot of experience at Ironman, but he has won 2 in 2019 in 7:44 and 7:45. Arguably the best male short course athlete out there ever. Can he figure out Ironman on the big World Championship stage? Well, he's definitely got the pedigree. We also have the likes of Javier Gomez, Sebastian Keeney, Ben Hoffman, Dave McNamee, Joe Skipper, Cam Worth, Matt Hansen, Daniel Bacard, Florian Anker. Whew. We're excited. Hope you are too. Another bonus for this race, not being in Hawaii, is of course it's a more reasonable time of day for most of us to watch. Well, at least here in Europe. The racing gets underway at 6:20 Mountain Daylight Time, and that should be done 8 to 9 hours later. So starting just after lunch and done before midnight here in Europe, which is far better than the early hours of the morning like Kona is. Let us know where you'll be watching from. Heather and James will actually be out in Utah watching it live. So of course, give them a shout if you're there. But I, like many of you out there, will be watching from a screen. Well, let us know, as I mentioned earlier, your predictions for this race in the comment section down below. I hope you have enjoyed today's video. If so, please do give it a thumbs up, give it a like. Thanks ever so much for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel.